All right, welcome to episode 9. I am your host, Meta, and this is our last audio podcast. From here on out, it's going to be video time. Super excited about that. Also excited about what we're talking about today, which is the fallout of Afghanistan and how do I go about making decisions, like when do I trust my gut versus listen to other people. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll dive right in. All right, so I am often asked about my thoughts on Afghanistan, and the main reason why I'm often asked about my thoughts on Afghanistan is because I have a very unique history with the American war in Afghanistan, and that is, as a young Air Force officer, I was involved in the planning for the very first opening days of the American war in Afghanistan, and as an old American Air Force officer, I was involved in the planning and execution of the last evacuation out of Kabul. So I have a unique perspective in that my career spans the vast majority of the Afghan war. And so people ask me a lot of times why things happen the way they did. And the question I am most often asked is, what happened, and what does this mean for the United States? Is this like a giant strategic failure, etc.? And frankly, kind of answering that last question first, the short answer is, in my opinion, yeah. I think that this was a strategic failure on the part of the United States that has deep roots, and it really goes all the way back to the start of the war in Afghanistan, which was when we jumped into the war in Afghanistan immediately in the aftermath of the attacks on September 11th in 2001. There was a big push publicly, politically, for there to be a response to this, and I think rightly so. But the response that happened was this very broad, sweeping narrative of what became the global war on terror, right? We're going to pursue terrorists everywhere, all around the world, because the thinking goes, it's better to fight them there than it is to fight them at home. And I agree with that in some ways, but what that led to a little bit, in my opinion, again, is that it sort of led us to not focus as maybe closely as we could across the broad span of that war. So 20 years, right? We kind of lost focus on what was going on in Afghanistan from time to time because we wandered off and did other things under the umbrella of this more broader global war on terror, right? Zooming in a little more specifically, though, I don't know that the American enterprise that fought the war in Afghanistan, and be that political or diplomatic, economic, allied, military, etc., I don't know that we really had a good understanding of what we were getting into in Afghanistan. And I'm not saying that people within these various apparatus of the American government and our allies didn't know. I'm just saying that as a collective, we probably didn't know as deeply as we should have, right? Afghanistan is a complex place with a complex social, cultural, tribal, ethnic, religious, geographic background. And frankly, going to that place and saying, we're going to be able to do this and defeat this government and quickly install a new one that's friendly to the United States' strategic interests, I think was kind of short-sighted on our part, because that's a tough place to win a war, historically speaking, and I think we, sort of downplayed the challenges that we were going to experience there, right? And then, from the perspective of what happened there at the end, why did it come undone so quickly, and how did this happen? And I think, in a lot of ways, that's reflective of the other two parts, and that because we didn't focus and because we didn't really know what was happening, the end came upon us a lot quicker than we imagined it would, despite people within the military and political realm and diplomatic realm working very hard to keep everything sort of orderly and in line and ready to leave Afghanistan in a orderly manner. I think we totally misjudged exactly what was going on and how good or bad it was going to be once we did sort of commit ourselves to leaving that country. So I think those things added together to sort of leave Afghanistan in in the semi-catastrophe that it was when we walked away, and why, and a lot of reasons why we stayed there for as long as we did. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit. There's obviously a lot more to talk about there. Maybe I will in future episodes, but I think that'll leave it for now. So this is a good question I got recently about how do I know when I'm making a decision if I should follow my guts, as it were, or if I should listen to other people's thoughts on it. And that's a good question, right? Like if you could break apart the science of decision making and always make the perfect decision, knowing when to follow somebody else's advice and when to listen to your own thoughts on it, you would be a better decision maker than 99.99% of all people in the world. But what I'd say is it boils down a lot to how you make your decisions, right? And how the people whom you are listening to make their decisions. And what I mean by that is this: if your decision-making process is what I'll call a logical decision-making process, in other words, you break down the pros and the cons and the risks and the rewards, and you measure those things against each other appropriately, then you can make a decision often against other people's advice, knowing that you have weighed your options appropriately, right? And similarly, when it's time to listen to other people's advice, if you're not sure how to weigh the options and other people are telling you like, hey man, look, I'm from the outside looking in, I'm weighing these options for you, the risks and rewards, etc., and here's what I think, well, then maybe that's the time when you should listen to somebody else, right? And the other part that goes into that is like, well, how much expertise do you have in the area in question, right? Are you well versed in the thing that you're talking about or not, or that you're making the decision on, right? Or is that other person well versed, right? Or are they just making something up, or are you just making something up, right? Like, is this just your best guess because you don't know a whole lot about it? Well, then maybe if somebody else knows a whole lot about it, you should listen to that person, right? Like they're an expert in whatever it is that your problem that you're trying to solve. And where this often breaks down, in my opinion, is when the decision made fails, right? And frankly, a lot of times it doesn't matter. Right? I mean, it does matter, but sometimes it doesn't matter if your decision fails if you know that you've gone through the process properly and you've made a good decision. Sometimes things just fail. And I'll give you a good example of that. Pete Carroll, coach of the Seattle Seahawks, who recently left the Seahawks, is famously, for lack of a better way to put it, unapologetic about his decision to throw the football on the goal line against the New England Patriots, which led to an interception and cost the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl. And his reasoning behind it is he sort of says that, hey, look, this was actually a good decision. It just didn't work out in our favor. And sure, the stakes were high in this case, and it was, catastrophic for the team. But in his way of measuring, in his way that he went about solving this problem, it was actually a good decision, right? And his reasoning, in my opinion, is pretty sound, right? He was like, look, on this particular play, as we set it up, we typically make this number of yards based on the personnel that New England had put into the play. We had known, throughout the game that we had not made that many yards. And so we had this much time remaining on the clock and this many yards to go. And so based on all of those factors, he chose to throw the ball in that case, knowing that that was his best likely outcome of all of the choices that he had available to him, right? Now, the fact that it failed, in his opinion, it's not totally irrelevant, but sort of it doesn't change the fact that that was a good decision. So wrapped up in all of this, when is it time to listen to somebody else and when is it time to make my own decision? The last thing to remember in this decision making is, right, just because something went right doesn't mean that it was a good decision. And just because something went wrong doesn't mean that it was a bad decision in the end, right? Sometimes you can make a really good decision and still things don't go your way. And sometimes you can make a really crappy decision and, by luck and timing, it just works out in your favor, right? So what I would say is using the tools that you have available, weighing, how much I know, am I weighing my outcomes? Am I weighing my risks? Am I measuring the risk and reward against each other? Am I listening to those people that might be experts in the field and can help me? Then I can make a good decision, even if sometimes that decision doesn't work out. So hopefully that helps. I appreciate the question, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. All right, so there you go. That is the end of episode 9 and the last audio-only episode of the Fighter Pilot Professor. I hope you enjoyed, and the next episode will be a video one. So keep shooting me your questions, and I'll let you know where you can find this in video format. Have a good one.